Hey everybody, welcome to the Fanny Slam MLB Livestream. I'm John Apemba filling in for Howard Bender today, alongside, as always, Craig Mish. Craig, how's everything going for you?
Doing well, John. We have the fantasy season more than halfway and for break, fantasy and reality. Kind of exciting time, I think, for a lot of owners. Right now, really, I think moving toward figuring out whether they can compete or not. I know that my teams are in that range right now. Some are good, some are bad. But for me, I've always looked at the All-Star break as a time to take a break in terms of fantasy. I know some people get really aggressive at that time. Usually on Sundays, I'll make my waiver wire moves, but I'll take Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to just take it off. I'm glad that baseball only has one game on Thursday this year. It looks like it's the Cubs-Cardinals, and that's the premier game that they have that night and nothing else. And that's kind of where I'm at.
No, I feel the same way. It definitely is nice to relax a little bit, baseball being the everyday grind that it is. I for sure, kind of sit back, take in the All-Star festivities, watch the Home Run Derby, Futures game, and everything like that, and just sort of, take a break. Because like you said, we go at this every day, 24/7, so definitely nice to step away from a little bit. But like you said, we still have some games to be played still, and then when we get back, so why don't we take a look at some waiver wire pickups for this coming week? Phillies outfielder Nick Williams currently hitting 355 over the past week. He had a strong June, awful June, strong May, and is hitting well in July. What's your take on Williams?
Yeah, I think it's time to buy now on Williams. I think probably he's owned in all NL only leagues and maybe some 15-team leagues, but I think in a lot of 12-team leagues, the time is really now to jump on him. I think Kapler, the manager of Philadelphia, at some point will decide to go with the hot hand as opposed to a lot of this rotating, especially as we get close to the postseason. And Williams has really looked good at the plate. I think he has potential, to maybe hit another 10 home runs the rest of the season, drive in 20, 30 runs if that's possible for you. And again, keep in mind, there's going to be a lot of players losing playing time when they're traded at the deadline. I don't see the Phillies adding another outfielder in this spot, so I think that his spot is safe. And Aaron Altier just, to me, hasn't been what I thought he would be. So Nick Williams is an interesting name out there in 12-team leagues that I may want to take a shot on for the second half.
Yeah, like I said, 2 of the last 3 months he's had OPSs over 900. June, he struggled, hit 218 with 688 OPS there, but for sure, if he's, we've seen from him of late kind of what we're going to look forward towards the future, a big pickup there. A guy that I've been on often this season in DFS has been German Marquez in Colorado, the pitcher. Great road splits this year, 2.62 ERA on the road. Obviously, just had a really good home start, which, he ended up hitting a home run against Arizona.
Yeah, right.
Descalso. But, right now, 2-0, 2.25 ERA, 13 strikeouts, 12 innings pitched over his last 2 starts. What's your take on Marquez?
Yeah, Marquez has been around the block, but this is more about opportunity and streaming situations, probably more if you're playing in the DFS or the season-long format of even 12 or 15-team leagues. Marquez is 2-0 in his last 2 starts. And, Chad Bettis is sitting on the DL and John Gray is sitting in the minor league. So I think that they're going to keep rolling out Marquez at this point. Look, he's had some good starts. He's had some bad starts over the course of his career. There's going to be some inconsistency. And then when you're dealing with a Coors Field pitcher, you know what you're getting into. But at least for the time being, the Rockies have put themselves back in a position to compete. I don't know how long that's going to keep up. But my guess is you'll see Marquez in that rotation in August and September and then at the end of this month. So I would think that as a flyer, you can kind of stream him and maybe some starts against San Diego in the second half when the Rockies play them. Maybe some favorable starts at home also.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a 9.26 K per 9 as well, so the strikeouts have been there for him this season. And, yeah, if you can get him on the road, you're looking at a guy that's been very productive this season. Obviously, in Coors Field, his ERA is over 7, and that's sort of ballooned, his seasonal numbers. But I've kind of been a fan of him. Like you said, if you can pick him up if you're in daily moves or in DFS, I think he's certainly someone to look at. Moving down the list, we have Milwaukee called up Corbin Burns. Pitched 2 innings in his debut and picked up the save. He's been a starter in the minor leagues. There's been some rumors kind of floating around that the Orioles wanted him in a Machado trade. What's your take on Burns? Do you think he gets moved?
Yeah, see, I don't really have any insight on that, but here's what I know. I saw him pitch in person the other day when the Marlins played the Brewers. I was there at that game, and everyone was very impressed with his performance. I mean, remember, this is a kid that's being called up to do things that he wasn't doing in the minor leagues. He was in the bullpen. He was starting now. He's in the bullpen. So the question that you have to ask yourself is Milwaukee putting him in these situations to try and boost his trade value, or genuinely do they want to take a look at him and see what he can do in the second half of the season? He's their number one pitching prospect. He does have some swing and miss ability. And the other thing that's working in his favor is both Kyle Davies and Jimmy Nelson are really big questions for the second half of the season. At some point, will they decide to put Burns in the rotation? I don't know. Will he be traded to another team? That certainly seems possible. But if you're playing in deeper leagues, the NL formats or the 15-team leagues, I think you have to grab him and see where he ends up, because if he does get traded and it is to a National League team, they could put him in the rotation right away. So again, the best pitching prospect on Milwaukee, a team that's going for it right now, are they going to rely on him to be their second half savior, or are they going to use him to get one? I don't know, but he needs to be owned at this point in some deeper formats.
Now, how much stock do you put into sort of minor league numbers? Because this year at AAA, he's struggling. He's 3-4, 5.15 ERA, 1.45 WHIP. Do those numbers take into account for you? I mean, he is playing in the PCL, which is the, hitters haven over in AAA, but, numbers wise, he doesn't look like a guy that deserves to be called up. Obviously, it worked out in his favor in his debut, but, do you think he's capable of having success at the major league level right now?
I mean, he could. You said the PCL, and I think that's really the key to it. The other part of it is, again, is just factoring in fantasy what could be a smokescreen for a trade and what is real. We just don't know the answers to that right now. My guess, John, is that if they really believed that he would be one of the top 5 guys in their rotation right now, they would have done what they did with Freddie Peralta and put him right in the rotation. They didn't do that, and they have him out of the bullpen. Notice also, if I'm not mistaken, he hasn't pitched since those 2 innings, if I'm not mistaken. He threw those great 2 innings. So maybe this is what's going on right now, is they are actually thinking of trading him. That certainly could be the case. I don't know. My read on this right now is I haven't heard anything, so I'm just giving you the facts. But again, if you're playing in deeper formats rather than streaming some of these really poor pitchers, he does have the pedigree, at least from a scouting standpoint, that he's their number one pitching prospect.
Right. In Tampa Bay, they have that carousel of relievers, obviously using the opener, kind of putting some guys in different positions. Diego Castillo, though, currently 1.8 ERA, 20 innings pitched, 21 strikeouts. He's got 5 holds over his last 8 appearances. Where do you think he fits in the back end of that Rays bullpen?
Yeah, Castillo's an interesting name because the Rays will probably move more players at the deadline. They've really enjoyed using Romo in all these situations, but if there's a trade candidate in either July or August, and let's not forget about the August deadline. I think the August deadline may have more action than the July. Remember what happened last year with Verlander. Mm-hmm. So I think teams are really there's so many teams that already know they're in the postseason. Why would they invest so much for rentals, for one-year rentals? They can wait a month and get them on the cheap. I think that's going to start happening a lot. So I think Romo eventually will be moved. Alvarado is another name out of the Tampa bullpen that is obvious to everyone, because I think in most American League or deeper formats they own him. But Castillo could be very quickly on the radar, and if you're playing in a keeper league and you have him for $1 or almost nothing, look, Tampa's had a lot of success in that 9th inning with converting those guys into closers. I wouldn't be surprised if Castillo's in the mix there for that.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with you there. I own Alvarado and Romo in different leagues. They've both been pretty impressive in holds leagues that I'm in, so I definitely agree with you there. Sticking with the relievers, a guy that you might be familiar with from the Miami days with Steve Cishek, 3 saves, 1.96 ERA. Brandon Morrow obviously was hurt a little bit, came back, but Cishek got the last save of Morrow unavailable. What's your take on his role? Where does he fit?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a surprise because Cishek, as you mentioned, was a closer with the Marlins, and since then, really hasn't been in such high leverage situations. But I suppose that the Cubs and Joe Madden saw what he was doing against right-handed hitters. And playing in that National League Central, there are a bunch of them, especially on St. Louis and on Milwaukee. And so I think there's a chance that he could be in the mix for saves. Now, remember, Edwards Jr. was on the DL when Cishek was getting the majority of that save time, but they've basically bypassed Edwards and Strop at this point to use Cishek in more high-leverage situations. If there's a game in the 9th inning where, for example, the Cubs are playing the Cardinals and Matt Carpenter is at the plate and it's the ninth inning, Brandon Morrow is going to get that save opportunity. It's not going to be Cishek because he has more trouble getting lefties out than he does righties. But I would say at this point, keep an eye on Cishek and his progress, because as the season goes on, if anything else happens tomorrow again, Cishek's the guy in the ninth. Yeah,
for sure. He's definitely looked great and filled in that role perfectly. A first baseman that I've picked up and owned for probably most of the year now, though, but his ownerships around the league seem to be pretty low. C.J. Cron in Tampa Bay already has 18 home runs. His batting average is never going to be much more than what we're looking at now, around 250. But, I mean, the power seems pretty legit for this guy. He has an everyday role in a lineup with Tampa Bay that's surprised some people, the way they've been playing of late. He hits left-handed pitching really well. What's your take on Cron maybe going forward? Do you think he continues this path?
Yeah, I mean, he's owned, I would guess, in most leagues by now. It's very hard to go on the waiver wire and find anyone with his power that you could just pick up and add. And the path to playing time is there one way or the other. I don't see them trading him. I feel like they made a good deal there and got somebody for the future. Tampa's had a lot of guys like this at that position before. They've had Logan Morrison. They've had these big first basemen and these big designated hitters that just hit home runs and don't do a lot else. But Cron's going to end up hitting 30 home runs without a doubt for Tampa this year. So the ad for him is certainly a good one, and I don't think there's any risk of him being moved.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. I was just surprised. I play, a handful of my leagues on Yahoo. They have the ownership levels, and he was only 30% owned in standard leagues. And I felt like that was pretty low for a guy that, is putting up the numbers that he is. In Yahoo, he's 38% owned. So, I mean, he's out there in, 60, 70% of leagues right now. It's interesting to me. Yeah, I think he's kind of going overlooked is kind of how I put it.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. And if you're searching for power, you know exactly what you're getting with him.
Yeah, for sure. If we go to AL and NL only leagues, in our pre-show prep, you brought up Tim Tebow as a potential NL only call-up. Was that for serious? Do you believe? Really?
It's just interesting to me, and I wanted to bring it up because, look, who would have thought that at this point that we would even be talking about the possibility of him being called up? And we know that if he does, it's a September call-up. What is he going to be in reality and fantasy? I have no idea, but this guy continues to prove everybody wrong every step of the way. When you think he's done, he's not. He's going to play on the Mets in September, and he's going to be owned in fantasy in my Tout Wars NL only league. That is certain. So if you know that, and you're a gambling man, could Tebow get 70 at-bats in September and hit 7 home runs? I think so. I think there's a chance of that happening. So
I guess. For me, I look at his numbers right now in Double-A, 35% strikeout rate. He's hitting .269 with a .421 batting average and balls in play.
There's nothing pointing to it, but there is some magic going on with this guy.
Hey, that's the case, like you said, with him his whole career, is that he finds a way to continue to be a productive athlete at really any level of sports that he plays when it doesn't look like he has the skill set to do so. I'm
not advocating anybody running to the waiver wire to pick up people. Let me say that, okay? So I'm not being stupid here. But I will say that if you're in an NL only league, in a 10-team or 12-team league, and you get to the end of August, I would pick him up. And I would put him on my team because you're looking for a breathing body at that point. Yeah. And I really do think that he's going to get called up and he's going to hit some home runs. I really do. Do I think he's going to be a star ever in baseball? No. But I think at some point we have to stop doubting this guy and start just saying, look, there's some path that the Mets have created for him. And I'm looking forward to see what he can do. I don't have him in any league. I don't own him in any league. I'm not planning on picking him up. But it's worth the conversation at this point. They put him in the minor league all-star game. Okay, so
makes no sense to me. But
it's coming. It is coming. What he will do, I don't know. This morning on my radio show, I said, odds are he's going to get called up, and in his first at bat, he's going to hit a home run. You know that this is coming, right? Yeah,
he hit a home run in his first ever pitch that he saw at the minor league level, something like that, down in rookie league or whatever it was.
Rookie league, single A and double A. I think he's hit home runs every single first at bat.
I think they're throwing him 70-mile-an-hour fastballs down the middle. I think is what's going on there.
Maybe so. It'll be interesting, and I think it's more of just a fun story than anything else. But
sure.
But September, look, you just never know And I don't even know how many people are heavily engaged. Think about that at that point too. In an NL only league, let's say you're in September. You know if you're in or out at that point, and if you're not in the top 5, you can't win. So there's probably no point to even that conversation. But look, I'm just throwing every objective out there at this point.
Hey, I'm a big fan of Tebow stories whenever they kind of break. So it'll be interesting to watch, like you said, for sure. A guy that I've looked at in the AL only leagues, and he's probably already owned in 2 catcher leagues for sure, but Blake Swihart now sort of has a path to consistent playing time. Christian Vasquez is out 6 to 8 weeks. The Red Sox have 0 people in their minor league system to trade if they're looking to make moves right now, the way it seems. So Swihart could be a trade piece for them. Once the top catching prospect in baseball, and because of his offensive upside, it wasn't because he's a defensive whiz by any sense of the imagination. He's got a 5-game hitting streak right now. 5 for 9 with 2 doubles over the last week. Maybe this is a guy you go out and grab now in AL only, or speculative pickups in 2 catcher leagues. I think he's going to get a showcase as we head to the deadline.
Yeah, that's the key, is that there's less than a month till the deadline, and I think he'll get an opportunity to play. And then the question will be, and it's a great suggestion in terms of catcher, because it has been a wasteland for catchers this year. And even if you know a guy is playing, I picked up in my NL only league Jacob Nottingham on Milwaukee because I knew he's going to be playing because Pena went on the DL. So it's the same fantasy scenario that Swihart plays himself into. The question that you do have to ask yourself is, what would it require for Boston to upgrade that position if Swihart is not the guy? They can't count on Vasquez at this point. The names that are out there, I think Ramos is the one name that would be the most interesting from a Boston perspective, because he'd be a rental for a couple of months, so they could pull the trigger there. And Boston also needs a second baseman, it looks like, too. So
maybe they did just sign Brandon Phillips, who is hitting well in single A. So
yeah, maybe not impossible, but I think. I think maybe Castro on Miami is not a bad fit there too. But we'll have to see how it plays out. But Boston will do a couple of things. I don't know how deep they're going to get into it. Their money, they've already spent so much money. And I know they've talked about that too.
Yeah, the Steve Pearce pickup was a nice ad for me. I wasn't really sure where they were going to go to get that right-handed bat. They didn't have to give up much to get him, and he got plunked the other day and out of the lineup. But yesterday rather, and he came out of the lineup with a shin contusion. But he should be fine. I think they're going to ride Sandy Leon. Actually, is probably the majority of the time at their catcher. So if they do end up trading Swihart, they'd probably just call up somebody from minor leagues, or they would take a guy just to spell Leon once a week, we'll say. I think Leon's switch hitter. He's actually been pretty good at the plate of late, so they don't necessarily need to rely on someone to platoon as much as they did with Vasquez and Leon. I think that was more the fact that they paid Vasquez in the offseason. They wanted to get him the amount of starts. But if they do move on from Swihart, I can see Leon playing the majority of the time with, a random backup behind him. I don't think they'd go and acquire a catcher. I just know that Swihart's a guy that is supposedly requested a trade. If he gets the showcase, gets the playing time, and continues to sort of hit like he has, maybe that bumps his value, and the Sox moving for a bullpen arm, which they pretty desperately need at this point. So we have touched upon some AL and NL only guys these last 2. As we head into the All-Star break, as we head into the trade deadline, how do you kind of handle your leagues with AL and NL only?
Yeah, I think that right now what you have to do is kind of identify which categories, if you're playing in rotisserie leagues, that you're really struggling in. And that's what you should do over the next week before this thing gets started again. Because the problem that you have in playing fantasy leagues in baseball is that we're going to get to a point here that, and it happens every year for people, the biggest misnomer to me in fantasy baseball is that people are moving to football now. That I don't believe. But what I do believe is that in the next few days, people are going to stop logging into their teams because they have that routine down of logging in every day and changing their teams around. And now that's gone because of the All-Star break. So the next 3 days, they just completely stop and then they don't come back. So if you're planning on making a trade with someone and you really need to acquire something, you have to take a deep dive into it now because those owners may not be around for you in the next few months. So that's kind of what I usually do. I don't get crazy with it, but you have to understand that once Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday comes, a lot of people just say, you know what, All-Star break, they're out of the routine and they don't come back. So that's my biggest piece of advice is that if you have plans to make a trade with somebody who's in 7th place or 8th place out of 12, you may as well get started now. You may not see them again in August and September. And it's a sad statement, but it's just true.
Yeah, definitely if you play in some of those public leagues for sure. Maybe not so much if you play with friends and family and whatnot. Though you can kind of get them to stay, more active. But I've definitely been in my share of, public leagues where people just check out if they find themselves in the bottom half of the standings. Hard to make moves. So I definitely agree with you there. You talked about the All-Star break. We talked about a little bit at the top of the show. As you said, people kind of step away from it. But what specifically do you kind of do as we hit the All-Star break?
Okay, so there's a couple of key things that you want to do in terms of your team. The first thing that you do is you go to your teams one by one and you figure out who's on the DL, who you're stashing on the DL. There are going to be players that are currently on the DL that are coming off soon, and there are other guys on your team that have no chance of coming back. And so you have to make a determination at that point, who do I want to keep, who do I want to drop? We'll talk a little bit later about Noah Syndergaard. He's obviously back today, so you have to activate him. There are other players who are on the DL who are clearly not coming back. Corey Seager, there's just no reason in a redraft league to own him anymore. He's out for the year. You can cut him. Jimmy Nelson was another name that people stashed and held on to for the whole season. At this point, you may want to let him go also. So again, specifically with your teams, find out who's on the DL, who's coming back, and who's not. And just start unloading these kind of players. Also figuring out players that have just been put on the DL. Do I really need to hang on to these players? How many DL spots do I have? Is Todd Frazier really worth owning for the second half of the season? Like, that's the kind of player you have to look at. Did somebody cut Greg Bird in my fantasy league now that he's gotten hot again? And it's more of just kind of roster management over the next few days than anything else. That, and as we talked about before, really identifying the teams that are in your league and the owners that are in the league that are dropping out, because I think you have to jump on those two. And then the final thing is that if you're playing in keeper leagues or dynasty leagues and you have to have the guy on your roster at the end of the season to have him for the following season, you really need to start diving down into who the September call-ups will be in the minor leagues. And I think a lot of that will be gained, thankfully, this Sunday when we get to see the futures game. I understand that Robles will not be in the game. Victor Robles, Eloy Jimenez will not be in the game because both those players are hurt, and Kyle Tucker just got called up. But there are going to be a number of players in that game that are going to be on opening day rosters in Major League Baseball next year. So make sure you watch that game and become familiar with the players that are in that. And then as a result, you may want to stash a couple of those players to kind of use for either the second half of the season or next year. Specifically in that game, there's a couple of guys. Brendan Rodgers of the Colorado Rockies, I think, will be the opening day second baseman next year for them. Mitch Keller, who's probably going to pitch for the USA team, is going to be up at some point this year for the Pirates, and he's going to start. So this is just a couple of names to start with, but there are a lot of names there that we'll see on opening day rosters in 2019.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, how soon do you start maybe stashing guys in the minor leagues, for sort of these like second half call-ups? If you're, say you're in the middle of the pack, the top of your league, is it worth stashing a guy and dropping a player that could potentially help you now and hope that they, call up? Is there any like specific prospects that you think could really be immediate impacts once they get called up this year?
Yeah, I don't really see it because there's only 2 months left. The other thing that I usually do in terms of strategy is that we're on July 13th, and for leagues that play with the waiver wire strategy where you're ranked 1 through 10 and then you kind of lose your spot based on who you pick up, and then conversely with the free agent acquisition budget, I'm quiet this time of year. What I'll do is I'll be a little bit more careful because I know on August 1st that there are going to be players that are going to get switched around and I'm going to need to use my waiver wire position or the money. So my advice is on that front, now is not the time to get crazy like this Sunday or next Sunday, but it is the time to kind of anticipate where the moves may come from and where the playing time may come from with some of those players. Right. But Keller, I think, is an interesting name for Pittsburgh because they're going to have nothing to play for, and I think that they're going to use him in September. So that would be one potential streaming pitching option that I would look at.
Nice. You mentioned using your budget there. If you're in an AL and NL only league and you see maybe a big name switch leagues like a Manny Machado, somebody like going to the National League, you've heard the Dodgers obviously in the mix for him. You've heard Brewers maybe potentially in the mix for him. How much of your budget do you end up spending on maybe big names once they kind of cross over format? Do you have sort of a strategy in that fashion?
Yeah, you got to go all in. There's nothing left at that point, especially with a big name like that. It would be a player changing leagues. if you're playing in that mono league, that only league, and then obviously if there's a bona fide closer going from one stop to another, and you are bereft of saves or even steals, if there's a player that's Billy Hamilton goes over and gets the start somewhere else. I don't know that he would, but Hamilton's been much better over the last month. So those are the kind of situations where people are going to wait for September. There's no reason to wait for a September call-up. You're in or out of the league at that point. You're either going to win or lose. July 31st and August 1st are the drop-dead pick-up drops for me. And when I get to August, I only have enough money left to make moves. I don't have any money left to acquire big names. And I'm kind of at that point in all my leagues now with the money. But hopefully on August 1st, there'll be more clarity.
Nice. You mentioned a little bit earlier that Noah Syndergaard makes his return to the mound tonight. Tough matchup potentially against the Nationals, but his rehab start's gone well. Looks to be over that ligament strain in his hand. What are you expecting from him tonight going forward? Do you think he's the guy that maybe gets moved?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question, but they said he would miss a week, and he's missed almost 2 months. I can't believe it. This has just destroyed a couple of the teams that I have. So I'm excited to see him back. The Mets aren't going to score any runs for him, so you're not going to get any wins. We know that from Jacob deGrom. He's had all kinds of trouble winning games too. But Syndergaard, look, when the talent is there and when he's on the mound, he has the chance to be one of the top 6 or 7 pitchers in baseball. Some people thought he would be the number 1 pitcher in all of baseball of fantasy. He really dipped down in terms of walking guys and striking out less, and I think it had a lot to do with that finger. You absolutely cannot count on health with him. We know that at this point. But the good news is that it's not an arm, it's not a lat, it's not a rib, a leg, a shoulder. It was strictly his finger. So I would say that moving forward, the odds are if he makes starts, that you'll be able to get some really good counting numbers from him the rest of the season. So I wouldn't look at tonight's start as anything major, but I think moving forward, it'll be curious to see how he does.
Now, you mentioned probably won't get many wins. You mentioned the Jacob deGrom thing. I haven't asked you this before, but what's your take on wins versus quality starts in leagues? Are you a quality start person? Do you use wins as a category? How do you most effectively get the most value out of those type of guys who just pitch well on bad teams?
Yeah, you have to decide how much you want your relievers to be a factor in fantasy leagues before you eliminate wins. I think that people forget about that a lot in leagues. If you want to go to quality starts, that's fine. But then again, you're eliminating all wins from bullpen guys, which means that if you were smart enough to pick up Trevino on Oakland 2 months ago, he got you 7 wins. So that's luck, and I get it. It's adding more luck to it, but there was some strategy in identifying who he was, and you were rewarded for that. So I'm fine with going to quality starts if that's what people do. Most of the league I play in are with wins, and it is not a good indicator for sure as to what a pitcher is. But you're also taking away the strategy of owning a Josh Hader or owning one of the guys in the Houston bullpen or owning one of the guys in the Yankees bullpen, because you know that they're in a tight game. They're going to end up winning a lot more than they lose, and you're getting a win there from that bullpen guy. So to each his own in that spot.
I would even say Tampa Bay. You have Yarborough there has got 8 or 9 wins now.
Wins. Yeah,
8 wins, and he's only pitching a handful of innings, but it's because they use that starter there, and losing some value out on him. Another guy that's making a start tonight is Nathan Eovaldi. Real solid his last 3 starts, 21 innings, 2 earned, 23 strikeouts. Competition's a little meh. Did it against the Mets, Marlins, and Nationals, but what's your take on him tonight?
Yeah, I think that this is the most interesting name in fantasy and reality. Now, I was never very big on Eovaldi, even when he was with Miami or the Yankees, for that matter, because he just didn't have great secondary stuff. But we know he has a fastball. And the other part of this conversation is that he's a free agent at the end of the season. And John, Jay Happ and Cole Hamels and Tyson Ross and all these arms that are out there, if I'm a team, I'm not interested in any of them. Or maybe not at the price that they're going to be asking for.
Right.
Are any of those names intriguing to start in game 2 of a 5-game postseason series? I don't think so. No. And Nate Eovaldi actually may be the one guy that I would have some interest in based on the way that he's pitching. So he'll pitch tonight. And then what happens at that point? If he has another good game tonight at Minnesota, would the Rays dare throw him in another game before the trade deadline? I don't think so. I think in fantasy, you have to own him, because what happens if this guy ends up with Milwaukee, or what happens if he ends up in LA? I don't think there's many arm restrictions for this guy. I know he's had injury issues in the past, but boy, he would be an intriguing name for me to pick up in a 12-team or 15-team league because of what we're talking about here, chasing that win or chasing wins at the end of the season.
No, for sure. I definitely agree with you there. And so the strikeout numbers, I think the whip's probably been the most impressive thing. This is a guy, 1.35 career whip right now, 0.81. He's just, not walking a ton of people, not giving up many hits, controls there with the strikeout ability. Yeah, that's certainly impressive. And this isn't kind of a young guy either. He's been around since 2011. So yeah, I think we kind of know what we might be getting from him. But as you mentioned earlier, so I keep jumping around, but you mentioned that a futures game. Is there any prospects in particular? I know you mentioned Keller, but someone that you're looking to watch, someone that anybody who isn't familiar with some of these guys should be looking at?
Yeah, Charlie Hayes, his son, Brian Hayes, is in this game. A scout told me at one point that he'd be the best hitting prospect in the Pirates organization, and to keep an eye on him. They told me that in April, and man, that has come true. I think that everyone is going to be on his radar at some point. Again, he's the son of Charlie Hayes, used to play in the big leagues with the Yankees and the Pirates, I believe, as well, and maybe the Giants. And then, I haven't seen a lot of Fernando Tatis Jr., so this will be my real first time of seeing him play against some good competition. So that's another name. Keston Hiura on the Brewers is also a good name, too, because I think that had Miami, when they made that trade for Yelich, had it not been those four names that they got back, like Brinson and Harrison and maybe the names that people aren't familiar with, I think Hiura was the one name and the one player they didn't want to trade. I think he's going to be the starting second baseman for the Brewers potentially next season. So there are a few players that I haven't seen play, John, that I'm looking forward to seeing in this game. From a pitching perspective, I mean, look, I'd love to see Hunter Green. I mean, he'll probably throw 100 miles an hour and he'll pitch one inning, but you don't really get a lot, I don't think, from those guys. Last year, I was fortunate enough to sit right behind home plate at that Futures game in Miami, and it was really cool to see the break on the ball of Honeywell and Tanner Scott and some of the other guys were in the game. But remember, they know these pitchers are not throwing 5 or 6 innings. So what are they doing? They're throwing their best stuff out there for 15 pitches, 20 pitches. I can't get a real gauge from that. So it'll be interesting for me to see, but I think those names give you an idea of some of the ones that I'm keeping an eye on.
Nice. Let's head up some questions. We got a few over here on Facebook. One's more of a trade theory question. Keon Broxton's been mentioned in some Manny Machado trades. Again, the Brewers have recently been linked to potential Machado trade. This question here is whether it's worth picking up Broxton at the expense of even a Bader or Janikowski.
No, and I don't think that anywhere. Look, I mean, Broxton to me is somebody that the Brewers will probably keep for a defensive replacement as their 4th or 5th outfielder. If he ends up somewhere else, I don't really see him as a starting option. He's had his chances before, hasn't made the most of them. He's a great defender. We know that. But Milwaukee's going to need a great defender in a 5-game series in the postseason, and I think that he's going to be the guy. So, no, I'm not running to grab him, and even if he is traded, I don't see him as much of an asset.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there. Any other kind of thoughts heading into this next upcoming week? Any more fantasy thoughts?
No, I think that, again, you have don't freak out when your guys are going on the DL this weekend. Some teams are able to finagle the system a little bit and add some more bullpen arms because of starting pitchers. I think that, to me, the most intriguing issue as we go is probably what happens to James Paxton. I know that he had a lower back issue when he came out of the game the other day. The Seattle really needs him for the stretch run. He's super important to that team. And what does Seattle do if they miss him for an extended time? So I'll be keeping an eye on that. And the weekend series is always very difficult to judge before the All-Star game because teams know they have that break coming, and so they tend to go a little bit easier on some of the bullpen arms and some of the starting pitchers to give them that full week off. So to me, it'll be just watching the games tonight and tomorrow, and then I'll be checking out the Futures game on Sunday. And then we'll be back here on Tuesday to preview the second half of the fantasy baseball season. Yeah,
that was great. Well, Craig, great talking to you again.
Yeah, John, same to you.
Howard will probably be here on Tuesday. If not, you'll get to do this again with me, and I will be in front of the camera. So good to talk to you, and good luck, everybody in FA Nation.